Welcome everyone to This Explainer. Today we're diving deep into a topic that has fundamentally reshaped our modern world. We're going to take a structured, entirely objective look at the chronological escalation of the largest European conflict we've seen since World War II, the Russo-Ukrainian War.
If you stop the average person on the street and ask them when this war started, they'll almost always tell you it began with that massive invasion in February 2022. But actually, to truly understand this conflict and how we got here, we have to anchor our timeline much earlier. We need to go all the way back to 2014. So here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at broken agreements, then the start of the hybrid war in 2014, followed by what daily life is like under occupation. After that, we'll cover the 2022 full-scale invasion, the resulting war crimes and legal battles, and finally wrap up with the impact on global geopolitics.
Okay, let's jump right into Section 1, Broken Agreements and Early Warnings.
It's really important to realize that before a single shot was even fired in 2014, some absolutely critical international security guarantees had basically crumbled. After the Soviet Union collapsed, Ukraine actually inherited this massive nuclear arsenal. But in 1994, they willingly gave up those weapons. Why? Well, in exchange, they signed the Budapest Memorandum, where Russia, the US, and the UK assured them that Ukraine's independence and borders would be respected. Fast forward to 1997, and the NATO-Russia Founding Act is signed, saying both sides didn't see each other as adversaries. But then, things shifted dramatically in 2008. The Russo-Georgian War highlighted a major pivot in Russian military strategy. It showed a clear, undeniable willingness to use direct military force to get what they wanted politically in neighboring countries.
And that 2008 conflict is a huge puzzle piece here. Political scientists point out that the international community's pushback to the invasion of Georgia was pretty weak. And the so what of that is really significant. That weak response in 2008 directly contributed to Russia calculating that future warnings from the West just wouldn't hold much weight. It essentially laid the groundwork for future territorial aggression because the precedent was set. There would be minimal consequences.
Moving on to Section 2, 2014, the hybrid war begins.
So this brings us right to the aftermath of Ukraine's revolution of dignity, which ended up ousting the country's pro-Russian president. And the tactics Russia deployed in 2014, they were textbook hybrid warfare. We're talking unmarked troops, you might remember hearing them called little green men, along with cyber attacks, covert proxy fighters, and local militias. The whole point was to give Russia plausible deniability. Contrast that with what we saw years later, conventional warfare. That's the mass mobilization, the overwhelming missile barrages, and your traditional massive multi-front ground invasions.
The way things escalated in 2014 was literally lightning fast. In February, those unmarked Russian troops seized political institutions in Crimea. By March, Russia officially annexed the peninsula following a referendum that the international community widely rejected as completely illegitimate. Then, the unrest spread eastward like wildfire. By April, Russian-backed militants were seizing towns in Ukraine's Donbas region and declaring independent republics. And as Ukrainian forces tried to take that territory back, regular Russian troops secretly entered the fray by August of that year. So what started as this localized proxy fight morphed into a highly static, incredibly lethal trench war that barely budged for the next 8 years.
Let's look at Section 3, Daily Life Under Occupation. We really have to pull back from the high-level military strategy for a minute and look at the ground-level personal reality for these families. Imagine being caught in one of these occupied territories. According to reports from the UN Human Rights Office, the human impact is just severe. Civilians face intense pressure to take Russian passports, and if they say no, they can actually be denied basic health care or even face arbitrary detention. And it gets worse. Ukrainian men who are forced into taking citizenship can then be drafted to fight against their very own country's army. There's also this systemic Russification happening. That means the active suppression of the Ukrainian language and culture, while kids are subjected to militarization and indoctrination through brand new, mandated school textbooks.
Now, Section 4, 2022, the full-scale invasion.
That fragile status quo absolutely shattered on February 24, 2022. This was the breaking point where all those hybrid operations were tossed aside for total, undeniable war. The Russian military launched what they called a special military operation, and the sheer scale of this initial invasion was staggering. It was a three-pronged attack. First, a northern thrust coming down from Belarus pointed straight at the capital Kyiv. Second, a southern front launching right out of occupied Crimea. And third, a southeastern push pushing out from those proxy-held territories in the Donbas. But, as we know, fierce Ukrainian resistance ended up stalling that northern advance, and Russia was eventually forced to abandon its attempt to take the capital city.
Over 7.4 million. Let that number sink in for a second. That represents the registered refugees who had to flee Ukraine by late 2022. That rapid shift to conventional warfare and the widespread bombing of cities created Europe's fastest-growing humanitarian crisis since World War II. Millions of civilians were displaced practically overnight.
This brings us to Section 5, War Crimes and Legal Battles.
Because these conventional military operations were devastating civilian areas, it triggered some unprecedented international legal investigations. International law stepped right into the center of the global response. The UN General Assembly strongly condemned the aggression, calling it a direct violation of the UN Charter. And then, the International Criminal Court, the ICC, opened a formal investigation into war crimes. In what is an incredibly rare move, the tribunal actually issued arrest warrants for Russian President Vladimir Putin and several other key officials.
To really understand the foundation of those massive legal moves, we have to look at the findings from the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission. The verified evidence they gathered on the ground is sobering. The UN has documented overwhelming evidence of atrocity crimes. We are talking about civilian massacres in suburbs like Bucha after Russian forces pulled back, the forced deportation of thousands of Ukrainian children across the border into Russia, and indiscriminate strikes that have resulted in over 1,420 distinct attacks on medical infrastructure.
And when it comes to military detentions, the scale of the abuse is truly staggering. A top UN official made a claim in August 2024 that highlights this perfectly. An estimated 95% of Ukrainian prisoners of war have suffered from systemic torture or severe mistreatment while being held in Russian captivity.
Let's wrap up with Section 6, Geopolitics and European Stability.
Zooming out from the immediate battlefield, it's clear this conflict has permanently rewired modern global alliances. It's not just a localized border dispute anymore. It is a fully globalized conflict. On one side, the Russian coalition is heavily relying on logistics from Belarus, the well-documented 2024 deployment of North Korean troops, and the extensive use of non-state mercenaries. On the flip side, Ukrainian support is anchored by the US, the UK, and the EU. They've been providing just unprecedented levels of military and humanitarian aid, while at the same time enforcing massive, sweeping international sanctions against Russia.
So I want to leave you with a pretty profound question to chew on. As this conflict drags on, how will the failure of those early international security agreements like the Budapest Memorandum, ultimately reshape the future borders of Europe? It's a really stark reminder of just how fragile our global geopolitical stability actually is. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer today. Keep learning, keep questioning the facts, and I will see you next time.